Please be seated. There's a classic story retold over and over in different ways, The Prince and the Pauper. It's a favorite of mine, but I'd like to share with you an early iteration of the story from our tradition. There once was a prince, the sole heir of his parents' throne, and he was a bitter prince, nasty and cruel to all his subjects, most likely because he did not wish to continue to live a royal life, nor did he enjoy the demands and expectations imposed on him. So under the cover of darkness, he fled the castle and set out to leave the kingdom, when, suddenly, he bumped into a young orphaned pauper at the edge of the forest. As the two recombobulated themselves, they looked up into the face of the other and found it was as though they were staring into a mirror. The resemblance was uncanny. It was then that the prince knew what he must do. In an act perhaps motivated by self-interest, or perhaps it was an uncharacteristic act of graciousness, he told the pauper to walk to the gates of the castle, up to the guards, and tell them that he's the prince. He said, when they ask you why you're in pauper's garbs, tell them that you were out walking and your fine clothes were ruined by the splash of a passing carriage, and this is all you could find to wear on your journey home. And so the pauper, having little to lose, decided to give it a try, and was soon ushered into the palace by the guards. With wide eyes, he was dressed in the finest clothes, fed the finest food, was educated by the finest teachers, and loved dearly by his new adopted father and mother, the king and the queen. And the royal subjects immediately saw the change in their young prince. He showed kindness, he showed wisdom, he showed sensitivity to all he encountered. Soon the king and queen passed on, as all our parents do. But they left this world content in the knowledge that their son had learned to be a good king. Each day, the young man wore a crown and fine clothing, held a scepter that was only matched in its magnificence by the extraordinary way he managed the kingdom. But at night he disappeared into a hidden chamber, far from the eyes of his subjects, and spent some time alone. Every day he did this, until he was married to a princess from a far-off land. It was she who became intrigued by the mystery of the hidden chamber. She would ask the young king daily, "What's in the mysterious room that you keep disappearing into?" And he would reply, "It's where I keep my most precious treasure." In time, the mystery became too great. She steeled herself to open the door and peek into the hidden chamber, expecting to find diamonds or gold, and she was startled and surprised to find laying on a simple table pauper's clothing, the rags worn by the boy when he came to the castle on that first day. She brought the clothes to the king and asked for an explanation. He shared his story and told her that every night he put on the clothes, it helped him to remember where he came from. It helped him to remember his responsibilities. It helped him to be himself. This story is our story. We are a wandering people. We have wandered the earth far from the lands of our ancestors, taken in by nations, and for generations we lived as paupers too, subject to the whims of others. It was only in the past few hundred years that our ancestors began to seek a different way and a different path. It was at my dinner table that I was introduced to these paths. I, like many of you, have tremendous memories of family discussions at the dinner table. It was around that dinner table that I believe I was given my greatest treasure, the clothes that make me who I am, my identity. I know I'm not different from many of you because it is around dinner tables that families talk about their days, share important stories, and sometimes they discuss the world around them. For parents, it's a place to teach their children their family values, and for children, it's a place to challenge those values. For me, that table was where I learned through osmosis the ways in which the Jewish question played out in my family's history. For those of you who don't know what I'm referring to, the Jewish question was the name given to a debate in European society over the period of the Enlightenment, right up into the 20th century, pertaining to the appropriate status and treatment of Jews in society. In Jewish communities, the Jewish question was at the forefront of how communities and individuals saw themselves and organized themselves politically. As Europe was divided between fascism and communism, my family, like so many Jews of the 20th century, divided themselves between communism and Zionism. I suspect that the only difference between them is the speed to which they're rolling in their graves that I became a rabbi. I remember stories of my great-uncle Johnny, who through a sense of idealism fought the fascists in the Spanish Civil War. I remember stories of my cousin Norman Grant, who heroically purchased and smuggled munitions from the United States through Canada and on to the Palmach as the Jewish community was forced to take up arms and defend the fledgling state of Israel. These were the stories at my dinner table. There was a deep and abiding desire to find the answer, along with answers to the great questions and issues of our day. And though the world had changed greatly since the days of revolutions and wars of independence, those stories for me did not feel like a distant memory. As I grew, I found that there may have been answers to the Jewish question, many answers, but the one answer that speaks to me today, the one I am engaged in daily, is America. During Rosh Hashanah, I delivered 2 sermons on the changing definition of success. For those of you unable to attend, here's the Reader's Digest version. Webster's Dictionary currently defines success as the fact of getting or achieving wealth, respect, or fame. It's a horribly outdated definition, not at all in keeping with how Americans feel today. Students at Strayer University have begun a project to redefine the meaning of success and have interviewed a wide variety of Americans over 2 years and have found that 9 out of 10 Americans believe that success is more about reaching goals, building relationships, loving what you do for a living, and happiness than it is about achieving wealth, respect, or fame. In my first sermon, I examined how the definition of success could be redefined for an individual. In my second sermon, I examined how the definition of success could be redefined for Congregation Shalom. Tonight, I would like to talk with you about what the changing definition of success might mean for our home, the United States of America. I suspect that many, if not all of your relatives came to America with hope in their hearts, that at last they could live in a society that would not outright reject, subjugate, or suppress them. That with hard work, a little chutzpah, and intelligence, no matter where they were from, they could become someone. In short, they had the American dream. The root of that dream can be discovered plainly for all to read in the foundational document of the United States. In the almost prophetic words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by God our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." I even love reading those words. They're poetic, and they're beautiful, and they're true. And tomorrow, we'll read from our Torah portion, Nitzavim. There, in a similar vein, Moses will speak to the children of Israel, saying, "You are all standing this day before the Lord your God, the leaders of your tribes, your elders and your officers, every man of Israel, your young children, your women, and your convert who is within your camp, both your woodcutters and your water drawers, that you may enter the covenant of the Lord your God and God's oath, which the Lord your God is making with you this day." This text, like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution to follow, was a social compact. Moses taught that we were all part of that compact, the leaders and followers, the old and young, the men and women, the rich and poor. In short, all people are equal in the compact. All people are created equal before God. Perhaps Moses' dream is not unlike the American dream. The American dream resonates with us Jews because it speaks to our old pauper's clothing. Our more recent family immigration stories parallels our people's ancient and historic narrative. We were enslaved in Egypt, and with God's divine help, we were free. We wandered in the wilderness, and finally, after a long sojourn, we found the land of our promise. And as Moses instructs, we all share in this future. Once we were oppressed and subjugated, but on these golden shores of America, the vista for our people is limitless. In 1931, James Adams, in his book, The Epic of America, wrote a beautiful paragraph that fully articulates the beauty of the American dream. The American dream is that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. It is not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. It is indeed a beautiful dream. And yet, these days, it seems that it is more dream than reality. For the promise of a better, richer, and fuller life may be true for those of us living on the North Shore, but in the inner city of Milwaukee, a very different picture exists. There is tremendous disparity between the wealthy and the poor. We all know this. Truthfully, that is not so different than it has ever been. There have always been poor, and there have always been wealthy. There is no guarantee of equality in the American dream, but there is a guarantee of equality of opportunity. There was a promise of social mobility, but today I no longer believe that children born in neighborhoods like those of the poorest in Milwaukee have an equal opportunity to succeed as children born in more privileged neighborhoods. And if that's true, if there is no longer that guarantee, then we have reached a terrible turning point. Equality of opportunity implies social mobility, and this has always been a part of the social contract. It is an unalienable right. I know I'm not telling you anything new. I know you've heard this before. It appears in the newspapers, there are stories on the news, and it is outside of our windows. But the fact that we have grown to accept or ignore, to be indifferent or defeatist in the face of the erosion of this dream is a betrayal of not only the principles of the America our ancestors risked so much to be a part of, but also of the best values of our Jewish tradition. We must be moved to action. We must all be moved. This sacred space moves me, just as I believe it does you. One of my favorite moments is when someone walks into our sanctuary for the very first time. Their jaws drop. In fact, I'm convinced I could sit here and read the phone book and we would still be inspired by the setting. I won't give it a try. The magnificent tree, the ark, the menorah on the ceiling, the eternal flame, the Jerusalem stone, the beautiful scriptural passages on the wall, the 10 Commandment windows behind you. All of these beautiful symbols mean something. They convey a story, a value, and a piece of our history. There is, however, one aspect of synagogue architecture that often goes unnoticed, and those are the windows. We do have glorious windows. But did you know that in our Jewish law, our sanctuary must have windows? We cannot be enclosed without the light shining within or the light shining out. Why? Because they are like our eyes. They are the windows to our soul. And those windows must allow us to gaze upon the world around us. We cannot be isolated, content to hoard the light that is within. Rather, we must bring the light to darkened corners. We cannot close ourselves off from the realities of the world around us. And if we were to look through those windows and gaze upon this beautiful city and cast our eyes to the inner city, what we would see there is a promise unkept, a dream unrealized. But we must not despair. We must act. I'm not so naive to stand before you and present a political solution, though I believe there may be one. I will not stand before you and tell that the Republicans or the Democrats have the right answers, though they might, if they would talk and negotiate and compromise. But I am going to tell you that there are things that we can do together on a small scale at first. There are small steps to beat back that darkness, to change the lives of individuals. We can actualize the charge of the great prophet Isaiah to be an or lagoyim, a light unto the nations, and we can muster that great American optimism that has defined this nation for so many, for so long, and engage in a moonshot. According to a Stanford University study, the classic determining factor that affects the degree of social mobility is education. Any person might succeed with equal access to the tools necessary to compete in the marketplace and move from one social stratum to the next. We've seen or lived it as part of our cultural experience, the blue-collar family that works to send their son or daughter to college for the very first time in their family, where the child then has opportunities their parents never dreamed of open up before them. What we know is that as higher education becomes more attainable, social mobility becomes more of a reality. However, income inequality is devastating to upward mobility. What of the parents who each work 2 jobs just to stay afloat? The single mother who has to work irregular hours? What of the child whose parents dropped out long before they could attain a basic level of education? As teachers assign more homework, where will these children acquire the same level of support that so many of us were afforded? Support lent or acquired for our children. In a competitive marketplace, how can these children move on to higher education? How can they become socially mobile? How can they live the American dream? Here's how. We have a school wing of our synagogue that sits empty every Thursday night. And I believe we have a congregation filled with people willing to give of their time and energy to sit with a young person and help them with their homework and help with academic exercises, and in so doing, help dream the American dream. This is our moonshot for the Jewish community that was granted the ability to succeed in this country, a people that seized on it through dedication to the principles of education. This is the natural next step, to share the dream that has been so beneficial to us. In short, we must remember our pauper's clothes. So we've begun a partnership with the organization Our Next Generation. Our Next Generation has provided academic tutoring, enrichment programming, and social support to thousands of students in the heart of one of Milwaukee's most challenged communities, with tangible results, better grades, higher high school graduation rates, improved self-esteem, and positive attitudes towards the future. With the financial assistance of an extraordinarily gracious anonymous donor family, we have the opportunity to use our school facility to tutor 15 kids from an inner city neighborhood every Thursday evening for the remainder of this school year, beginning in late autumn. We will be reinforcing what the young people are learning in class, helping with homework, and building connections between us. And we're seeking volunteers, people who can tutor these 15 young children. We're seeking volunteers to help make them weekly snacks in our kitchen. And we're seeking volunteers for enrichment programs. I'm so pleased to let you know that Eileen Stoller and Leanne Boris will be chairing these efforts. If you're interested in participating in this program and receiving more information, please call me or speak with them and read October's bulletin for ways that you can participate. This wonderful program can be as transformative for us as it is for the young students whose lives we touch. This is a start. 15 young people can become more. 1 + 1 + 1, we can transform the world. Our ancestors were strangers in strange lands. They were treated as the other. No one called them brother. No one called them sister, until the beacon of liberty shone brightly to the farthest corners of the earth, from the great cities of Western Europe to the shtetls of the East, granting a dream of America. We were strangers in a strange land, and now in our midst are people who, despite being born here, and despite being our fellow citizens, languish in a dimmer liberty's light, treated as though they are strangers. They are our brothers. They are our sisters. And we must once again kindle that light fueled by our American dreams. There's a story from our tradition that teaches us this important lesson. A rabbi once asked his students, "How do we know when the night has ended and the day has begun?" Immediately, the students thought that they grasped the importance of the question. There are, after all, prayers that can be recited and rites and rituals that can be performed only at night. And there are prayers and rites and rituals that belong only to the day, like putting on a talis, with the exception of Kol Nidre, and reciting the Shema. It is therefore important to know when the night has ended and the day has begun. So the brightest of the students offered an answer. "Rabbi, when I look out at the fields, I can distinguish between my field and the field of my neighbor. That's when the night has ended and the day has begun." A second student offered her answer. "Rabbi, when I look from the fields and I see a house and I can tell that it's my house and not the house of my neighbor, that's when the night has ended and the day has begun." A third student offered an answer. "When I can distinguish the animals in the yard and I can tell a cow from a horse, that's when the night has ended." Each of these answers brought a sadder, more severe frown to the rabbi's face, until finally he shook his head and said, "No, not one of you understands. It seems you only know how to divide. You divide your house from the house of your neighbor, your field from your neighbor's field. You distinguish one kind of animal from another. You separate one color from all the others. Is that all we can do? To divide, to separate, to split the world into pieces? Isn't the world broken enough? Is that what the Torah is for?" No, my dear students, it's not that way at all. Not that way at all. When the students looked into the sad face of their rabbi, and one of them ventured, "Then, Rabbi, tell us, how do we know when the night has ended and the day has begun?" The rabbi stared back into the faces of his students, and with a voice suddenly gentle and imploring, he responded, "When you look into the face of the person who is beside you, and you can see that that person is your brother or your sister, then finally the night has ended and the day has begun." Like the Webster's Dictionary definition of success, the fact of getting or achieving wealth, respect, or fame, I have read that the American dream has become the pursuit of material prosperity, that people work more hours to get bigger cars or fancier homes. Others say that the American dream is beyond the grasp of the working poor, who must work 2 jobs to ensure their family's survival. But I say we must reclaim the American dream. We must reclaim the optimism of days gone by and ensure that this next generation has the opportunities to live up to the greatest potential within each and every one of them. We must reflect on our paupers' clothes, that they may give us a sense of compassion, understanding, and hope. We must peer out of Shalom's windows at the vision of what might be, if only we endeavor to bring that light and see that the faces of our neighbors are a reflection of our own. May you, your family, and our great nation only know that light and goodness in the year to come. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will.